Hello, this is the Bite Weasel, and in this video we'll once again be continuing work on our Roblox Tycoon game. We're going to be investigating what we can do to improve the look and feel of our existing mechanics. So in the last episode, we sort of spent some time fixing a couple of collision issues and then sort of made these nice feeling chunky buttons so that when you stand on them, they sort of go down and they turn red if you cannot afford it. And it just feels nice. And I think we should continue sort of improving the look and feel of our game. And I think we can sort of make something happen when you actually buy an item. So right now the button feels good if you don't buy an item, but it doesn't feel as good if you do buy an item. So what we can do is we can sort of start thinking about effects we can add to the client. Everything we've done so far in this entire game has been server side. Like we've been using server script storage and server storage, and all of our scripts and all of our items are done on the server. But when you come to look at doing actual effects like particle emitters and sounds and things like that, those should be done on each individual client. Because one client doesn't need to see particle explosions from someone else's tycoon because they're not really involved. And so you can sort of cut down the amount of work the server has to do by making each individual client do those effects just for themselves. And so we'll look at doing that with these buttons. So I think what we should do is when you stand on a button and you actually buy it, we'll make a nice little sort of pop effect using a particle emitter. So how can we do that? Well, what we're going to need to do is when someone stands on a button, the server will tell the client, hey, this button has bought an item, please show an effect on this button. Okay, and that is not too difficult to add. Then we will need the client to actually say, okay, I got that event. Now I will clone a particle emitter and sort of fire it off so it shows an effect. And let's start with what that particle emitter should look like. So we'll come to our workspace and we'll make a brand new part, which I guess we haven't done in a while. But essentially we need a really small part that we can sort of move around, and we really want it to be invisible because the part won't be there, but the thing that we stick on the part is what we're interested in. So we'll turn the transparency up, and we'll also remember to turn off collisions because we don't care about those, and anchor the part. That's the important bit, so it doesn't bounce around. Then we're simply going to go down here, press the plus button, and add a particle emitter. Now, if you've never played with particle emitters before, they're really pretty handy. They basically control the lifetime and spawn mechanics of an image that you can select, and sort of you can pick its direction and how fast it moves and sort of whether it turns transparent or changes color as these things apply. So what we want to do though is have like a burst, like a little tiny explosion when you press a button. So right now, all these particles are like constantly firing out forever. We don't really want to do that. Instead, we want to do something like emitting a whole bunch of particles all at the same time, so it acts like an explosion. And here, if you click the particle emitter, you can see all the different options that you can choose from for your particle. You can change the texture, and you could change the direction that things spawn, the lifetime of these things, and you can certainly look up some longer tutorials that tell you like how these particle sort of emitter attributes affect each particular thing, because it can be quite daunting to make a virtual effect thing here look good. So I'm just going to show you a brief one that I'm going to do, but definitely go away, spend more time doing it. I'm just going to give you sort of the mechanics of how to do it, and you need to go away and make something that looks real good by spending a little more time on it. So you can change all of these things, but right now still what's happening is the rate is set so it's constantly firing out. We want sort of an explosion sort of effect. So really we want the rate to be 0, but then for a split second we want the rate to be 100 and then switch back down to 0. Unfortunately, there's not a good way of doing that inside Roblox Studio without a plugin. So A plugin that I found here that is pretty good is a free one called Particle Emitter Emit N version 2. And you can go away to this URL, which hopefully I add in the description of this video, and click, as we did before, the Get Model button. I've already got it, so of course mine says Try in Studio. But you can click that and then come over to your Roblox Studio, go over to View the Toolbox, go to Inventory, and change from My Models to My Plugins. You should see it there if you've clicked it, and you can install it. And once you install it, it will look like this. What you can actually do, and in fact we're going to do, is click the Show an Example button. Because what this plugin is doing basically allows you to emit things on a particle emitter. So you click a particle emitter, and then it basically runs what you can do in script to say, for a split second, emit this many particles. So if I do that on the particle emitter that I created, it looks like this. It looks kind of like a cloud of smoke, which is not very good. But the example provided with this plugin is pretty decent. It's a pretty nice explosion effect. So we're just going to borrow that. And you can certainly look up here for the different attributes that this is used to create that explosion effect. You can see the lifetime is kind of short. The rotation is 360 degrees, which we could sort of change if we didn't want that. The spread angle is 180, and so on and so on. And you can go away and customize those. But for now, we're just going to take that example and put it into our part. We're going to delete the one we had, delete the attachment that they had, and rename this to particle emitter. So now you can use this plugin, though, whenever you have a particle emitter to sort of emulate emitting some number. So we could have 50 particles emitted, and you can see it's a bigger explosion. And I think that looks cool for when you buy something. So we're going to use this. So that's our particle emitter with an invisible part that it's attached to. So how do we get this to be used on the client? Particle emitters don't really work very well on the server because it would have to calculate all these things and sort of send all those messages over to the client, and I don't think it handles that very well. So instead, particle emitters should be done on each individual client. So the way that you can do that in Roblox is give access to this part to each client. So we did something similar when we had the product that gets generated in the dropper, but the server generates it, it's put into server storage. When it's something the client wants to do, you can put it into replicated storage. And that is accessed by either the server or the client. So we'll change this to be by FX, right? It's our little explosion when you buy an item. So now we're going to need some script that runs on each individual client. Right now, we've only ever added a server script or a module script. There is another kind of script called a local script, and that works local to each client. So the best place to add that for us is somewhere under Starter Player and either Starter Player scripts or Starter Character scripts. The difference is the player scripts get attached to each player as they log on, and the character scripts get attached to that player's sort of humanoid character. So because we're doing stuff to do with the UI, you want to put that into player scripts, and we're not doing sort of animations based on the humanoid model, so we don't put it in there. So click next to Starter Player Scripts and add a local script. And we'll rename this something like, I don't know, Client FX. Doesn't really matter what you call them. But much like a server script, when the player logs into the game, this will start running immediately. Just like when the server starts up, a server script will start running immediately. You can also have module scripts either on the client or shared both between the server and the client by putting it into something like replicated storage, which is a shared place. But for now, we'll just have this local script that's going to have a copy on each individual client. So what do we want to do? Well, we basically want a function that is going to show the by FX, right? And what is this function going to do? Well, it's going to need access to replicated storage. So the way that you can get this is very similar to how you would do it on the server. Replicated storage equals game get service replicated storage. Okay, now that will give us access to everything that's in the replicated storage. Now on the server, when you access server script storage or server storage or anything like that, the server is pretty much loaded and all of those items will be available when you request them. On the client, though, that's not true because all of this replicated storage has to be replicated from the server to your client, which could take time based on how complicated the object is that it's trying to move, how quick your internet is, and what kind of device you have. So you do have to be careful whenever you're on the client script accessing things from the hierarchy. And the way that Roblox sort of handles this for you is by having a function on each item that allows you to wait until a child is there. So let me show you what that looks like. We want to get access to the ByFX. So we'll call it ByFX and we'll say replicated storage. And instead of going .byfx, because it might not be there, and instead of going find first child, because it might not be there, there is another option called wait for child. And this sort of blocks your script from continuing until this item is available under this part of the hierarchy. Okay, so that's great. It means by the time that this next line of code runs, this will have definitely been available. So you need to make sure that whenever you're doing client-side code, you wait for things because it takes some time to replicate them from the server all the way through the internet to the client. So there we go. We'll wait for that child to ByFX. And now we can say local fx equals byfx.clone. Very similar to how we cloned the dropper or we cloned the template on the server side. We do the same here. But we'll need to set it to a position, which we can do with set pivot, pivot to, and then we'll need to get the location to pivot it to, and that should come in as a parameter, I think. So a C frame, that is the location, we'll pivot it to that, then we'll say fx.parent equals the workspace to put it into our hierarchy somewhere, and then we'll say fx dot particle emitter, and then emit. And I think we tested with 25 particles. So this will sort of do a burst of particles for a split second of 25. Now, here on the client, what I've done is I've done dot, but remember that anything in the hierarchy might not be available. So what you can do is do wait for child here as well. So wait for child particle emitter, and then emit 25. And this should be good. This should create a clone of that item, move it to a particular location, and sort of do an explosion. And then after that explosion is finished, we want to get rid of this particle emitter. We don't want to keep it around forever because it's just like a one-hit wonder and then goes away. So how could we do that? Well, you could do something like task.wait for 3 seconds and then destroy it. That is an option. But there is another option that I'm going to show you so that you have both options in your arsenal when you come to write your own game. And that is access to a game service called debris. So the debris sort of function, I don't even know how you pronounce it, has a thing on it that allows you to add an item, and after a certain lifetime, that item will get cleaned up for you. So you can sort of add it to this service and say, I want you to clean up this item after X seconds. And it basically does this, but it does it internally and in a clever sort of way that you don't have to think about. So you can do that by saying the debris service, add item, and we'll say FX is the thing we want to clean up, and we want to do it after, oh, I don't know, 2 seconds. And that will take care of destroying that FX for us after we finished. So this is pretty neat, but right now, nothing is ever going to call this. So how do we get the server to say, hey, Mr. Player, you have bought something, please show an explosion effects? Well, this is pretty similar to how we've done a couple of other things with events, but now we can add a remote event into our replicated storage. So we've used bindable events before, which sort of work either on the server or on the client. A remote event is very similar, but it can be fired by one side and listened on the other side. So a remote event for buy item added in replicated storage means that we can access it on the client side to listen for it, and we can access it on the server side to fire it. Okay, so this is kind of what it would look like here. We already have our replicated storage service there, and we can wait for child, because we're on the client, the buy item. And that is a remote event. So you can say on client event, which is the event that will fire when this client receives a message, and you can connect to that, much like you do any handler. And the function can get past whatever the event gets past when it's fired, much like our bindable events. So here we will say, what do you think the server will give us? It will give us a location that is a C-frame, okay? And we'll simply say, show ByFX at that location. That seems pretty easy. It almost seems too easy, so maybe I'm forgetting something. But let's try the server half of this and then find out. So inside our button script, we already know that the onPressed will get called when the button gets activated. And down here, where we actually buy the item, what we could do now is then say, hey, tell the owner of this button that the item has been bought. So let's get a copy of that replicated storage service. We'll just copy it from here. And now, because we have access to the replicated storage service, what we can do is right before the button disappears, we can say replicated storage dot buy item. Now, because we're on the server, we don't really need to wait for it because it will already be there by the time the server starts up. And we can say fire client. And which client do we want to tell? Well, we want to tell the owner of this button. And we will say buy the item at this location, which is the button's get pivot. Okay? So this is really easy. Basically, we've got access to the same buy item that the client can see. We're firing the event to a particular client. That client is the owner. So in the client script, we're getting that same event, but we're listening to the on-client side of it. And once that happens, we should show this item. Let's see what happens. Okay, we don't need to see the particle emitter plugin again, so we can click that. And now here, whoa, it worked. Did you see? As soon as we bought the item, the server told our client, hey, I want you to show an emitter, and it did. So when we fail to buy it, it doesn't show an emitter, but when we do have enough money, there it is. So this particle effect might not be as amazing as it could be, but it sort of gives you an idea of how you can sort of tell each client, hey, something's happened, so why don't you show an effect? And I think this is cool, but I think we can add something else too. So we've got an effect, but why don't we add a sound too? So that will show you how to not only do particle effects like this, but we'll actually show you how to do sounds too. So down here in Roblox, there is a thing called a sound service. And this is really where you want to put all your sounds. You don't have to, but it sort of makes it easier to understand where they are if you do that. And what I like to do is create a sound group. which lets you control the volume for all sounds that are in this group. So I'll call this effects, and I'll add another one for later, and I'll call it music. And that's so we can sort of have UI later on that lets us control the volume of the music and control the volume of the sound effects. Now, under this sound effect, we're going to need a new sound. Now, unfortunately, I don't really have a good way of making a sound myself, so we're going to head on over to the toolbox. And inside the toolbox, we can go to the Creator Store, we can go down to Audio, and we can sort of search for a sound that we want. Now, you should obviously take more time doing this than I will, but let's find a success sort of sound. I don't know if you can hear that on the recording or not, but this sounds good. So what we'll do is we'll insert it into our FX thing, and we'll rename it to buy. Okay, so now we have a sound that we can play. So very similar to the replicated storage, we need to get access to now the sound service. So we can say sound service equals game.getService sound service. Then we'll need access to the FX. So we'll call it sound effects equals sound service wait for child FX. And then we'll get access to each individual sound in there. So the buy sound equals sound effects, wait for child. What is it called? Buy. Yep, there we go. And then you can simply just go buy sound and play. And in theory, now when we buy something, we'll get a little twinkling sound too. And there we go, we do. We have to wait until we have enough to test it again. Doopy-doopy-doo. But once we do, we should have sound. Yeah, there we go. And you can pick a better sound or spend more time figuring out what it should look like for your game. We can also do the exact same thing for when it fails to buy. Why not? So you can spend as much time as you like finding good sounds and sort of figuring out where they should play. I think this one will do. Can you hear it? It's like a dong dong sound. So we'll insert that one again. We'll move it up to the FX and we'll say it could be fail. Then inside our client script, we'll basically get access to the fail sound. Fail. And we'll call it fail. But now how do we know if we successfully bought something or failed to buy something? Well, we can head on over back to the button script, and just like we fired the item here, we can use this same event and just send in another parameter. So when they failed to buy it and we turn the color to red, we can fire the same event, the buy item, but we'll pass in a false for it failed to buy. And in here, we can add a true for it successfully bought it. So now in the client FX, when we hook up to that event, not only are we going to get the location, but we're going to get, well, there you go, success, yes or no. And we'll pass that into our show by FX. And we'll do the same thing here. And now what we can say is if not success, then fail sound, play, and return. And if it did succeed, we'll make the buy sound, which is the twinkling, and then the explosion. Wow, that's really simple. For such a small amount of work, you get kind of like a nice feeling. I don't know if you can hear it well on the video, but certainly when you play this and when you try it yourself, it does make it just feel like a better game. So we can come over here, we can buy some walls once we can afford it. Ooh, it's looking good. So that's really easy. If you need to send a message to the client to do an effect, just make a new event in some place that both the client and server can access it, like replicated storage, get a reference to it on the client and listen to it for on-client event, and then somewhere on the server side, get a reference to it and just fire it to a particular client. And that's it. It doesn't even take that much code. It doesn't take that much work. And it's just a nice little bit of polish to improve your game. And so you can do something similar with music. So I'll probably not end up having too much music in the video, but just to show you that it would work the same, you can go to the toolbox, you can search for some sort of music, and yeah, I don't know which is a good music to play, but you can sort of pick one and play it. Sure, we'll just insert this one. We'll change it to music. And inside your client effects thing, we'll basically get the music, sound effects, and sound music. And then music is the sound music dot wait for child music. And the sound service wait for music. So here we've got two separate sound groups. And that's because we'll come back later and sort of change the volume for each group in our UI. That's why they're separate. And now, once it's loaded though, you can just begin the music by playing it. And make sure though that you come to your music and you choose looped turned on. And that should keep the music going even when it gets to the end, it will restart. So it's probably a little loud for your game and you can sort of mess around with individual parts of the sounds or the sound group itself. And now when you start the game, you've got a little bit of music. I'm not entirely sure on the copyright of this music, so I'll need to be careful. Certainly when publishing the game, you need to be careful with all of these things and also uploading things to YouTube. I think if you just use a little bit of it, it's probably fine. But there you go. That is the idea of how to do music and sounds. Pretty straightforward and little explosions. I think for now, I will just turn the music off so I don't get into any copyright issues. So there we go. We have the ability to play music and we have the ability to add sounds. What's next? Well, there's one thing that I want to do that's very similar to these explosions. Look at this part. See where the dropper goes over here and it drops onto there? I think it would be really cool if when the product got sold, that number, instead of just disappearing, sort of floated up and then disappeared. I think that would make my game look kind of cool. So why don't we figure out how to do that? And I think it's probably not too bad. The first thing we'll probably want is a new event. So we can have a new remote event. This time we'll call it sell item because that's what's going to be happening. And inside our seller, much like the button fires the event when something gets bought, the seller will fire the event when something gets sold. So we can literally just copy this. We can go here and right before we destroy it, we can say replicated storage, which of course we need a reference to. So let's grab that. Back to sellers, put that in the top. Replicated storage dot sell item, which is the name of that event, fire the client to the player that owns this factory, fire it at the location of the other part. And do we need true or false? No. Instead, we probably need the worth. So how much this product is worth. Now we can go back to client effects. And just like we hooked up this, we can hook up another event. And this time it will be the sell item. And it's going to get a location, but instead of success, it's going to get the worth of the item as a number. And we could make a new function and paste it in there, or we could just write it directly in here. And that you could certainly do here too. You don't need a new function. Some people like them. Some people prefer to do it like this. It's exactly the same. Either way, whichever you like. So we've got that. Now, what do we want to happen? Well, we kind of want that number to fly away. So much like we had a particle emitter that we created, we need to create like a label that we can control. So how can we do that? Well, we sort of already have something that looks exactly like what we need inside the server storage. We actually have something here. So we will take this and we will paste it into the replicated storage. And we don't really need the bit that's wrapping it. We just need the inner part. So let's take that out, delete the product, and rename this to CellFX. And if you recall, this is just the actual product that has a billboard GUI on it. So we'll take the CellFX, we'll turn off the transparency. We'll turn on the transparency to make it invisible. And we will make sure that collisions are turned off and that it's anchored, just like we did with the BiFX. Now in the billboard GUI, we have a cost, and that's what we're going to update this worth to be. So very much like how we cloned the buy item effects, we're going to clone the sell item effects. So this should start to become very familiar as we do the same thing over and over. We sort of should make it so that it's easier to do something very similar on yours, because we've tried it a whole bunch of times. So let's just clone that FX, but this time it's the cell FX. We'll pivot it to the location. We'll make it visible by putting it in the workspace. We won't do that because we don't have a particle emitter, but we will add it to the debris system. And maybe this one lasts longer. Maybe it's 3. So that should put an item directly where it got sold, but it doesn't move. So how do we animate the moving of it floating up into the sky? Well, there's another service that we can use, and that one is called the tween service. And tweens are basically like mini animations that you can write in script. And the way that you make a tween is you ask the tween service to create one. So you say tween service, create, and then you send it in what you would like to animate with the tween. And we're going to say the FX, please. Then you have to give it some properties, some tween info that explains how the animation is going to work, the timing of the animation. So you can go tweeninfo.new to create a new one. And in here, you can pass in a bunch of parameters. The time, which is the duration for the tween in seconds. So we'll say 3 seconds to match that. And then optionally, you can pick these easing styles and easing directions. And those are really sort of the mathematical formula it uses to move something along the time from 0 to 3 seconds or whatever you specified. So you could say like enum.easingstyle, easing style dot, and then here are your options. So you can ignore all these, or you can choose one like sign, and these are all optional. The one thing that isn't optional is next in the tween service create call, and that is a property table of what you want to animate. So you add a table here, and we want to animate the effects. We want to animate the position. Right? Because FX is, and we can sort of tell it here, is a part combined with a billboard GUI. You know, we've done this typing information thing before. Has to be double colon. Billboard GUI. There you go. And what is it? Cost, which is a text label. So you've seen me do this typing information before. A double colon on here is a mechanism for saying, hey, I want you to treat the return value of this function as this. So I think colon probably means something else. in this scenario, so you have to do a double colon when you're sort of wanting to cast the return value to a particular object. So now it knows that there's a position, and you can say, I want the position to be the fx dot position, which is its current position, plus a vector 3 dot new, a new vector 3 that goes up by, I don't know, 4 studs. And then that is good. So we've asked the tween service to create a new tween to animate the fx item. And we said, I want it to last for 3 seconds and do it in a sine wave sort of pattern, which really means it's going to get, I think it slows down as it gets to the end, something like that. And then we want to animate the position, and the ending position we want is whatever its current position is, and then up a bit. And so you grab access to that, local tween equals the return value, and then you can say tween play. And in theory, that should work. The seller here, when we sell something, is going to fire an event to the client. The client is listening for that event, and when it happens, we clone the little billboard GUI thing here, we pivot it to the right location, we put it in the workspace, and then we animate it upwards. And after 3 seconds, it gets destroyed. That's good. The only thing left to do then is set the cost text to be equal to $, ... whatever worth was sent in. And we can do that before it gets added to the hierarchy. So now in theory, when a product gets sold at the end, we should see a little label just sort of float into the sky. We do not. Now, why is that? Where is this thing? Oh, they're over there. So the reason for that is because, much like we saw very early on with the template, it's not getting the correct pivot point. So what you need to do is set your primary part to the piece that is the bit that you want to set it to. So for whatever reason, it's getting set as nothing. So it's spawning exactly where it used to. But now we should see, ooh, we get money popping up. Look at that. Sort of gets sold, but the label sort of floats up. I think that looks cool. They're a little slow, so you can sort of mess around with the timings. Let's say it's going to be 2 seconds. And another thing that we can do is make a second tween that's going to play at the exact same time. And this second tween, called tween 2, is actually going to change not the fx, but it's going to change the fx.billboardgui.cost. And what it's going to do is it's going to change the transparency. And it's going to change it to 1 to be fully transparent. It's not transparency, it's text transparency. It cannot animate something that it doesn't know about, so that wouldn't work. But now we should see this float into the sky and slowly fade away. How cool is that? And then as we buy more, assuming we can buy more, we should see it, more of them. And just those few little tweaks, and your game starts to look a lot more professional, right? It's no longer going to look like all the other tycoons out there that just sort of, don't spend as much time as they probably should making their mechanics, but look how pretty it looks. And you know what? I think it needs a sound. Those feel like they should be popping, right? So we've already seen how to make sounds. We can click this. We can go to the toolbox once again. We can go to here and we can search for, I don't know why I can't close that, but we can search for something like pop. And we can change the filter down to a really, really small amount because we want it real fast. So like a second. And now you can, so hopefully hear some sort of, maybe not pop, maybe bubble sound. Yeah, that's okay. We'll insert that one in here and we'll call it cell. And we can go close that now, go to our client FX, and then get access to that cell sound. Call it cell sound. And we'll play the cell sound when something gets sold. Cell sound, play. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. So obviously you need to spend more time looking for sounds, making sure that they're all the same sort of volume. You don't want really loud sounds for some things and really quiet sounds for some other things. There you go. I think it's a bit slow though. Like I think the sound itself is starting kind of slow. It has a bunch of white space at the beginning of the sound. So what you can do if that's the case is sounds have this thing on them called time position, and you can set that to be some sort of value to sort of skip over the beginning of the sound. So now it should start a little bit closer to the actual sound when it plays. So instead of starting at the beginning and waiting some amount of time, I think that's still too slow, but you get the idea. You can sort of change those things and spend some time sort of figuring out what sounds best for your game. So now what do we have? Well, we have these nice chunky buttons that have an explosion when you buy stuff. They turn red and play a sound when you can't afford things. And then we have a popping sound that plays as you get more money. And I can't, it's just some guy going, isn't it? But that's okay. You can find a better quality sound when you do it. Yeah. It's so funny. So there we go. We can buy walls. We can buy a dropper. And we're just going to get lots of popping sounds. I don't know if I like that popping sound, but you get the idea. It allows you to just make a nice looking tycoon that just sort of feels like you've spent some time and put some love and effort into it. So there we go. Now what we can do though is one last thing I think for this episode is to make a signpost. So we can sort of click this wall, we can duplicate it, and we can move it along to there. And what we'll do is we'll have like our doorway here, and this we'll put into the template, and we'll call it sign. And then on there we'll have, instead of a billboard GUI, a surface GUI. And to that surface GUI we'll add a text label. Now surface GUIs attach to the side of a block, and you have to specify which side it needs to point to. So right now you can see it's here. So what we need to do is make sure that the face it's on is the correct one, which I guess is the left. Yeah, there you go. Now it's here, and we can set its size. Sorry, the text label size to fill the full bit. Yep. In fact, I don't want it to fill the full bit. I want a bit of a gap around it. So we'll make it 0.8. But now it's not in the middle. So we have to make it halfway across and halfway down. But it still won't be in the middle because right now we're positioning it from the top corner. Instead, we go up to anchor point and we say, I don't want to position you from the 0, 0 top corner. I want you to position from the middle point. So there we go. Now we have that. We can make this, what should we call it? Owner name sign a little better. So we can come down to the text, and this is going to be like unclaimed tycoon when no one has it. We'll scale that text up. We'll change the font to be probably the same one we're currently using for everywhere else. And we can change the text color, maybe some sort of blue. Then we can also turn on the stroke. Yeah, that looks not too bad. And I think on the text label, we'll have a border too. So the border will also make some sort of blue color, and we'll make it like that. I don't really like the blue color. Maybe a browny, reddy sort of color instead. Make it look like a sign. So there you go. We have now a place that will have the person's name that claims the tycoon. But how do we set this? Really easy. In our factory script, after it is cloned and when someone sort of gets assigned that factory, we can literally go factory.sign .surface GUI .owner name .text equals, and then the player .display name combined with '(s) tycoon. So now, when I play the game, it says Bite Weasel's Tycoon. And if we have not claimed it, it will say unclaimed tycoon. So if I leave the game now, it's going to re-clone the template over there, which will turn this to be unclaimed. And then when a person joins the game and gets assigned a factory, their name will now appear on that sign. So that is also pretty good. And so if I now buy the walls afterwards, we should see that it sort of fits in because of the way that we made that sign. Yay, looks pretty good. There we go, we have that now. So just with a few minor changes, we've managed to make our tycoon look quite a bit better. We have a sign that sort of shows you whether it's unclaimed or if someone owns it. We have a nice effect when these things get sold. We have sounds, we have these chunky buttons, and we have these explosions, and we have error sounds when you can't afford things. And we have music, although I've disabled it right now. So I think we're looking pretty good. And next time we'll find something else to make. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe, leave a comment, ring that notification bell, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time.